Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Reinvent Legal Business Series number 2. We're delighted to have you here today. As you know, in this series, we're exploring from a global perspective new themes that have emerged and those that have changed or expanded in what is now undoubtedly the new legal ecosystem, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that as well. These sessions are coming to you, as you know, live as a webinar, but they're also going to be made available as a podcast through our Legalpreneurs Sandbox podcast series. So you can watch and listen, or listen by yourself if you want to, or watch again, whatever the case may be. Today, we're discussing legal operations. Is it the new legal business game changer? And I guess we'll see whether you think it is or it isn't at the end. So the sort of things we're going to be exploring today are, really a definition of what legal ops is and isn't, what legal ops professionals do, and why this group, particularly in the in-house part of our world, has really taken legal departments by storm, and also how this whole concept, notion, and implementation of legal ops is really changing the face of legal practice as well. And of course, we're going to be talking about lots more. We have an international panel today from Australia and the US. They're going to introduce themselves. In fact, our first question is going to get them to do that and to talk a little bit about the work that they do. But to kick us off, I firstly want to say a huge welcome to Connie Brenton, to Amanda Fadgeman, and to Mick Sheehy. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Terry.
See, it's live. They're really responding in real time. So let me kick off with that question that I mentioned, and I'm going to ask each of you, who you are, what your title is, where you're located, and a little bit about the work that you do and the organisations that you work for. And Connie, since you're coming to us from the furthest away in California, and it's Sunday night your time, which is amazing that you're here. If I may, I'm going to get you to kick us off with that question.
Okay, I am very, very delighted to be speaking to a group in Australia. It's one of my very favorite continents in the whole planet. When I was a little girl, actually, I wrote a little note to my parents and I said, if you find this when I grow up, I would like to go to Australia. So I'm particularly happy to be speaking tonight. I have had a legal operations role for longer than most because it's a relatively new role within the legal ecosystem. And I started it about a decade ago. I started at Sun Microsystems, where they already had developed a team of 26. So I'm very grateful to that team for having trained me originally. And then I went from there to Oracle, and I stood up the role at Oracle. And then I had an opportunity to move and work with Matt Fawcett, the general counsel at NetApp. It's a digital solutions company in the Bay Area. And because of COVID, we are work from home until July of 2021. And I am coming to you tonight from Colorado.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. So I am also the founder of CLOC, Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, and I have also put together a D&I program that started last summer that is a work of passion.
Fantastic. Well, you're most welcome, and thank you again for joining us, as I say, on a Sunday evening. Mick, same question to you. Tell us about you and what you do and where you're from.
Well, thanks, Terry. Hello, everybody, and it is a great pleasure to be here. So my name is Mick Sheehy. I'm a partner at PwC, and I run a division called New Law in Australia. My background, I'm a corporate M&A telco lawyer. I started off at Mallisons, or Kingwood Mallisons now, and I worked in London for a number of years. When I came back to Australia, I joined Telstra, and I became a general counsel at Telstra. And I didn't really know an awful lot about legal ops, certainly when I started at Telstra. In my role as general counsel, I was in charge of the exec sponsor of our legal innovation, legal tech sort of aspirations. And to be fair, when I sort of first fell into that role, we didn't have we didn't have a legal ops function in the way that we describe them today. And we had a lot of senior lawyers sort of all trying to do a lot of legal ops stuff in their spare time. I was very fortunate to stumble across Connie Brenton about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was when I first started to find out just what legal ops was about and why it was so important. Connie and I were speaking at the very first Legal Tech Fest here in Australia, and when we first met each other, we quickly realised it would be a great benefit for our community here in Australia for us to start the first regional clock group outside the US. Connie mentioned before she founded Clock in the US, and Clock, the single purpose of Clock is to share best practice information about legal operations, innovation, legal technology, legal transformation. And so through a baptism of fire, I got to learn all about legal ops, and it became more and more a part of my life at Telstra, so much so that about 18 months ago, I decided to leave Telstra and start up New Law at PwC. And New Law at PwC is very much focused on many of the things that legal ops is focused on. So we are focused on helping corporate legal departments in particular, but also law firms with legal department strategy, bringing it to life through change implementation, legal technology, roadmap and implementation, process optimization, and ultimately manage legal services. And of course, really importantly, once you've got all that worked out, utilising all the data that you have in your legal departments to provide more insights back to your legal team and the business you serve. So that's what we do. My life is very much legal ops now, and that's a bit about me. Thanks, Terri.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Mick. And after that long list of things, I'm exhausted, so I don't know how you're not. Amanda, tell us about you and what you do in your organisation.
Thanks, Terri. So my name's Amanda Fadgerman. I'm based in, the COVID capital of Australia right now, Melbourne. So my background was, I studied computer science and law back before it was really a thing, and then worked in private practice. So I started out at Cause, moved in-house for a couple of years, and then in 2014, I moved into New Law. So I've spent the last 5 years focused on legal operations and legal tech. Going back to legal tech was a bit like, coming back home, using those computer science skills that I hadn't used for quite a while. First at LexFoco, which was acquired by LOD last year, and now I'm the head of legal technology at LOD. So LOD supports in-house legal teams. So we do a variety of things like secondments and extensions of your legal team, through to what I mainly do, which is legal advisory, legal operations, and legal tech consulting. So my team specifically focuses on, like Mick, process improvements, tech roadmaps, implementations, really focused on people. So improving lawyer wellbeing through either, reducing spend, boosting capacity, increasing speed and agility in process improvements. I've had experience working with a range of no-code platforms like Mitratech, Neota, Contract Express, and most recently in Power Automate, which is a Microsoft-based platform. And so that's 90% of legal teams use Microsoft, and they've got that technology anyway. So we're really about helping legal teams use the tech they already have. And we use the Power Platform in Microsoft to build matter management, document management, and contract management solutions, which we call LOD 365.
Fantastic. And again, just amazing. And thank you for that. Folks, there's a lot that you're all doing, and I suppose the definition or needing perhaps to have a definition of what legal ops actually is probably not a bad place for us to go next, because if you're new to the term, or even if you've heard it, it could mean different things in different places. So Connie, I was wondering if, we've got to keep you working because, you're a long way away. So we're going to throw this question to you first again, which is really asking whether or not it's possible, I guess, to define legal ops and maybe what it is and what it isn't. And I know you've got this kind of fabulous slide that I'm going to share with everyone? Because in defining it, I guess we need to think about how it's evolved in part as well, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's a question as to whether legal operations is a thing any longer. I think maybe about 5 years ago it was, and it was one of the impetus for the creation of Clock, because I was having a conversation with my own HR department in terms of what do you do? Legal operations, in a sentence, is running legal like a business. So the role of the general counsel has changed over the years, and as a result of that, so have the functions underneath the general counsel. Pre-1990, it was those who couldn't take it or couldn't really make it in outside counsel firms. They went over as the general counsel in corporations. That is clearly no longer the case. But when that happened, that was a time where we were getting invoices for services rendered, very little detail, everything was in writing, not much process, if any. Then in the 1990s to 2000, the issues became more complex for the general counsel. There was a heavy reliance still on outside counsel and some sensitivity to outside counsel fees, but still not a ton. However, in 2000 all the way through today, there is an expectation that the general counsel act as a counselor to the CEO. It is the role of the legal department to guard the company and guide the company. And I think at the very beginning, it was simply guard. And now when you move into a guard and guide kind of role, you need another talent set to actually run the department. So pre-1990, you had very small departments, one general counsel, maybe a paralegal. Now you have corporate legal departments that are in the thousands. And some of the insurance companies spend billions on their outside counsel spend. So there is a strong need for either an attorney or somebody who has some kind of understanding of technology or finance to be in a role then of running legal like a business. And that has become the legal operations role. The majority of the Fortune 500 now have this role within their department. This is something that this slide is something that I created for my very own legal department to let them know what in the world do you do? Because it's relatively new, and because if you're doing a very good job, it's quiet. It's like the ducks who are paddling like crazy on the pond. You can see a lot of motion underwater, but along the top, it's smooth as silk. So these are buckets or categories of work or responsibilities that the legal operations professional will perform in most legal departments. Not all, and there's a combination in some will carry all of these responsibilities. Some might not have litigation support, for example. That might fall within the litigation group themselves. Most people think about legal operations as these first two: strategy and financial management, metrics and analytics. However, it is quite a bit more. PMO, Program Management Office, we now have a full resource just to do program or legal project management on every single one of our projects. Knowledge management, communications, lit support, I said already, can be in or out. And then this service delivery and alternative support model, that's growing in importance and variety and texture because we have so many more options now in this space than we had before, and same with the legal technology. So NetApp went from 3 technologies when I started a decade ago to now 28 technologies within the department. Half of those going in the last 3 years, and 3 of of those going in since COVID, since March.
Wow. I mean, thank you for that. And Mick, I guess as you look at that and having been involved with CLOC, particularly as you mentioned in the intro in Australia, how has the evolution at all been different in this part of the world? And are there any bits that would be, for example, added to these boxes or emphasis more on some than others?
So I think, thanks. And I kind of did a fantastic job explaining that evolution of the role over a number of decades. And I would say that there are probably more similarities than differences between what's happened in Australia and the US. It's just that perhaps we've been a bit further behind, but I think pretty rapidly catching up. One of the reasons I think why there's such a focus on legal ops now in Australia is because the responsibility, there's I think universal acceptance that the things that legal ops roles need to focus on are really important. But in terms of execution, it was historically up to a combination of lawyers, senior lawyers and lawyers throughout the department to find some time in their busy lives to focus on this. And when you treat it as a sort of a side hobby, it doesn't get the attention it deserves. It's a combination of that and an expectation that we just take from the business what the business serves up, whether it be technology or support functions like finance, etc. And sometimes that'll be good, but quite often it won't be fit for purpose. So a real recognition now that we need to actually have a dedicated function within our corporate legal departments that are focused on that. And if you look at the wide range of responsibilities, I actually feel that we are at a point now in Australia where we're recognising that the legal operations department is responsible for continuous improvement, for transformation. They're the COO, they're the head of strategy. They're in charge of, they have specific responsibilities in finance, in HR, technology or IT, procurement. These are all functions and responsibilities that can't be done in the spare time by busy lawyers. And so I think that we are doing a good job of catching up. Perhaps the only other big difference between the US and here, I think there was a lot of focus in the US, and Connie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when legal ops roles started to appear on vendor management, and a lot of the IT, the specific legal IT was around e-billing. And that's probably an area where in Australia, I think we had probably, we had our panel arrangements under control a bit better. And so we didn't need to necessarily invest in legal ops to the same extent that they did in the States. But it was also the reason why we then fell behind, because we didn't actually have that capability within our legal departments. So in short, I think we're focused on the same things. I think we're doing a good job of catching up, and we learn a lot more when we actually share, like we're doing today, like we have done through CLOC, what's going on in legal departments in other parts of the world, because they're no different, they're not unique. These issues cross borders really relevantly.
And Amanda, that's probably even more true in many respects now than it was, 3 to 6 months ago, that this sort of knowledge sharing is global now as opposed to just local.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's thoughts that you'd like to add to this before we jump into kind of our next subject area. Just again, in terms of definition and this massive, really almost mind-boggling array of skill sets that are now housed within that legal operations function. Yeah,
sure. So to me, legal operations is in a nutshell, legal teams doing the right tasks for the right price. So legal operations at its core is about people, and so a good legal team is good people, but an excellent legal team is one where you've got those skills of a T-shaped lawyer. It's where you've got the people, the processes, and the systems or the technology in that order, but all those are in place for optimized efficiencies and lawyer well-being. So the only other points that I'd probably add to what Mick said is about what the differences between Australian legal teams, US legal teams, probably partially due to our size. So, you know, we have smaller teams as a generalization over here, but I think what's sort of become apparent is just because you don't have such a big team, you can have this function in some capacity. So even if you can't hire a dedicated person, whether or not that's an EA that performs some of those roles, or whether or not you've got a virtual legal ops assistant, or whether or not you've carved out of your BAU some KPIs for legal operations, it certainly can take many forms depending on the size and the maturity and the budget of the legal team. And just on the way legal technology has now developed. Legal ops is not legal technology. So there is technology out there that sort of says we are your legal ops platform. And I think that's really taking just one slice of it. Often those sorts of technologies are looking for problems to solve. So legal operations should always be problem-led because the whole premise is to uncover those root causes of inefficiencies and root causes of bottlenecks. And from there, develop your strategy. And so legal operations should always start with a problem. I think last year CLOC's conference was a really good example of how the Australian market has developed into having concrete case studies and case examples, where it really moved from the theoretical from 2 years ago to real practical examples last year. So it's a shame that we can't continue on that trend and see the 2020 version of CLOC in Singapore.
We will eventually. It will all happen again eventually. Yeah. I mean, look, a couple of points that I want to draw out from what all of you were saying there. I mean, we're focusing at the moment, obviously, on legal ops, which tends to be very, I guess, associated with or connected to in-house counsel. But as we look at the top of all of these columns, these are all things that are part of, and I think you've all made the point, part of business management, legal business management. So in that respect, they're things, no matter what the size of your firm, to go to your point, I think, Amanda, that you have, they're all things that you should be focusing on, right, in terms of managing your own business. But I wanted to just stay with for 1 second this whole idea of legal departments and legal ops, and ask you again a question, Connie, and I promise I won't keep asking you first for after this one, but ask you this question, and that is, in this column that we're looking at here, the green column, I'm going to call it, there's metrics and analytics that the legal ops folks are kind of managing for the organisation. But how do they kind of flick that and put the lens on themselves? Like, how do you know whether or not your legal ops function is performing well? What are the KPIs for your legal ops function?
Okay, so that's a very complex question, and I will reiterate that legal ops has people, process, and technology, and all of those components to running legal like a business are measured.
Yeah.
If you can't measure it, you cannot tweak it, and you can't perfect it. And so we measure everything, and we measure it, and we don't measure it for always. We measure it for short sprints. So if I see that we're having an issue in contract turnaround time on an NDA, we might only capture metrics for 2 weeks on that particular issue, and so that we can hone in. Some of the metrics now that we're capturing that are so critical are related to COVID, because most of us are being asked to take a look at our budgets. And so we are producing and sharing with the finance team, the larger finance team, metrics like, how do you benchmark against your peers? Profit, do you have the right number of headcount? Do you outsource some of your work? That has been particularly important to our finance team over time. Most of the analytics that are true KPIs for the organization, you need trending information for. And if you are new to legal operations, the most important thing I can recommend is to start gathering your data. Because once you have your data in place and you've cleansed it, takes about 6 months to get good, clean data, then you can start manipulating it, whether it be spend, whether it be headcount, whether it be turnaround time on contracts, whether it be how many people are reading your newsletter, whether it be the number of projects or playbooks that you have refreshed. But you can see, you can create a metric or an analytic for everything that's done in the legal department. And I will concur with both Mick and Amanda that it is important now, actually it's almost non-optional, that attorneys understand how the business of law runs for more reasons than servicing their clients. In order to put the right people in the right place at the right time at the right cost, you have to have some kind of an understanding of how the business is run.
Yeah.
So we have 82 playbooks. Each of those have analytics.
Wow. Thank you for that. Mick, I wanted to take those thoughts and get you to put your PwC new law hat on for a second, and just kind of as Connie was speaking to those KPIs, they seem to be pretty much basic KPIs for a business. So are you seeing in the new law part of your business that these sort of KPIs are actually the business KPIs in many respects for new law?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that so I completely agree with what Connie said, that there are so many different things to be measured. We recently released, just a month ago, a paper on what we researched to be the top 30 odd key metrics for legal departments to measure, but they're by no means definitive or exhaustive. There are so many, many, many things that can be measured. One of the key things that we did communicate in that paper, however, is that if you're going to be, whatever it is that you're going to measure, it's key that an important decision turns on it. If no decision turns on it, then it's arguable that the metric's not that important, because metrics help us make database decisions as opposed to gut feel-based decisions. And I think that historically, where a lot of legal departments, the world they have come from, has been one where many decisions are made based on anecdotal evidence or gut feel. And so I think that where our industry is going, and hopefully pretty quickly, is to have far more transparent decision making made around objective criteria. And so that not only can we then have more confidence in our decision making, we can start to compare different legal departments, different law firms, different other service providers, based on objective data that we can make an apple for apples comparison. The more that we're using data and metrics to do that, the easier those comparisons will be, and we'll start to really understand what is best in class, or where, learning from each other's mistakes far more transparently. So that's sort of a key way in which we sort of think in new law about what data and metrics are important for legal departments. And I think that it's going to become more and more a part of the conversation that we have with all of our clients when it comes to understanding how they can improve and what value service providers like us can add.
And I guess from their point of view, Mick, to also be able to make really informed decisions about competitive advantage, right? How do they differentiate themselves? If you've got that benchmarking, you can clearly see where you've got to do more of or less of, or where you've got to do something different. Is that a fair comment as well?
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of focus has been on how do we make legal departments more efficient? How do we take perhaps cost out and save time? and that's been a really worthy sort of endeavour. But I actually think it's missing the main actual opportunity, which is how can we add more value? But you can only add more value. So you can only have a conversation about what value add if you're measuring it and then comparing it. And so I think that the great opportunity for legal departments is to perhaps shift focus from being more productive or more efficient, which is still always going to be important, and then changing the conversation though to what new value we can add. And a lot of that will be through insights by harnessing the great data that sits in legal departments, in the legal ecosystem, and providing those insights back to the businesses that they support. So I think it's an enormously exciting conversation that can only be had when we're actually capturing, measuring, and using our data better.
Amanda, I wanted to pick up on something that you were saying earlier, and thanks, by the way, for those comments, Mick, but it's kind of drawing on things that all of you have said at the moment, which is this relationship between people and process and tech, but I'm going to pull data out as an additional one there, because I think it kind of overlays all of it. Our legal departments and that focus on legal ops and those things in particular, do you think that's really driving, or it's a catalyst for change in the industry broadly? And I guess we've been touching on that, but to ask that question for you squarely, is this function the change maker? We'll get to the game change a bit in a second, but is it a change maker for the moment?
Yeah, I really see those three elements as a bit of a Venn diagram, but it's also a continuous loop where, as Mick said, they all feed into each other in a loop of continuous improvement. So, it's a catalyst for change. What's that change? Is saying, should we change what we're doing? What should we change? How should we change it? Why should we change it? So the only way you can answer that question is to have data. And the only way to get that data is to have some sort of technology to capture that data. And the only way to select that technology is to understand your process or understand the problem. So that comes back to the people and the processes. So it's about finding that fit, which is on all three. And I think what Mick was touching on is legal teams traditionally were quite mature at understanding what that descriptive data is. So that historical data to explain this is what happened. So this is how we spent our time. This is a chart with an X and Y graph or an X and Y axis to describe a pattern or tracking a change. This is where the work came from. This is how much money we spent. This is who we did the work for. I think the catalyst for change for the future is now saying, let's look at the predictive or prescriptive data. So what could happen and what should we do about it? So an example might be, what's the likelihood of a certain event happening? What's the likelihood that this dispute's not going to mediate? What's the likelihood that this negotiation that we're spending all this time on is not going to end well? And that's going to then feed into whether or not our lawyers should be spending their time on providing, A+ advice on, that 100%, or whether or not good enough is sufficient. So I think that the change is going to be looking at that data, looking at the technology, and using a more prescriptive and a predictive analytics on that data to capture, not only triaging matters based on a lawyer's capacity, or triggering an alert if a lawyer if a request triggers certain metrics, it doesn't need lawyer approval, or it can automatically route to the right delegation of authority. And I think, what I'd like to see, I haven't seen a lot of teams doing this, but is where a legal request is submitted and the system says, we only think you should spend 2 hours on this task because we've determined that it's light touch or low touch, or red, amber, green, or, this is we've got $20 million worth of contracts with this supplier. They've always paid on time. We've had no disputes with them. So that's going to inform the way the legal teams improve and really apply that continuous loop of continuous improvement.
Absolutely. We've got a question that is actually a perfect kind of segue into the question from what you've just said, Amanda, and really to all of you. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase it for you here. And the question is, a big challenge for legal departments in really embarking on the legal ops and the legal tech journey is access to the wider organisation's financial, technology and operational resources. So even if they're within the organisation, it's kind of getting access to them as a legal department. What are some of the ways in-house lawyers can tap into those internal budgets and resources? And Mick, I'm going to ask you specifically, perhaps, to address that initially. Although I'm sure Connie and Amanda, you have some thoughts about that as well. So, drawing on that role that you had as in-house counsel, how did you get into those internal budgets and resources to kind of get all of this moving?
Not particularly successfully, at least, to be honest, Terri. But look, I'd break that into two.
Yep.
So there's one, what resources and capabilities and skill sets and technologies exist today that actually are at my disposal, but I'm not making the most of them because I'm not aware of them, or I just haven't been able to sort of focus the team on I'm just understanding what they are or the utility to my legal department. So that's one category. The second category is new stuff that I need to bring in and I'm going to have to spend money on. Now, I think that if I go back to my Telstra days, we had a sort of a mixed scorecard on both. I think that there was plenty of examples of capability that already existed within the enterprise technology and other skill sets within that existed within the organisation that we could have tapped into if we were better at it. And I think that's one thing that is always going to be important for legal departments, no matter how many sort of specific legal technologies or skills come along from outside service providers. You've always got to make sure that you're at least looking internally at what's available. On the competing for, or I guess establishing the business case to make specific investments in legal. As I said, again, we didn't have a great track record at it because we weren't used to doing that. And I think that when I compared our function to other functions, one of the big differences is we didn't have the data to go in there and say, well, here's the problem that we're trying to solve for. Here's where we are today. This is what great could look like. This is what investment we need. And this will be the actual value that gets added back to the business. I think that that's all changing. I think that legal departments are going to get better at both. But to me, being able to, you can't go and compete at the capital planning sort of through the capital planning process for money if you don't have, if you're not talking the same language and putting up the same business cases that other support functions are doing for their investment. So that's the challenge, and I think that we will get better at it. But it's definitely still a work in progress.
And I know this is a given in what you're saying, Mick, but I wanted to kind of also underscore this, that, one of the other big changes, I guess, is that it's looking at all of that, not in a way that just makes the lawyer's job easier to do, but most particularly what the business needs to prioritise and what they need delivered in the way that they need delivered it too, right? So that's the other big part. Yeah, it's the other big part, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that is critical. This is never going to, you're never going to attract investment if it's just about making the lawyers' lives easier. The lawyers are there to service the business. It's always got to track back to adding more shareholder value, and that's one way or another. And there'll be lots of different ways you can measure that, and ultimately improving the service levels for your internal clients is a good way of doing that. But you're 100% right. You need to it needs to be put together as a business case for the benefit of the business, not just the legal department.
Yeah, absolutely. Connie and Amanda. Connie, any thoughts in response to that question as well?
Yep, it was a mistake how we ended up where we are. So electronic signature became available to the legal department, and we thought, well, this is a cool opportunity. And I should say to all of you in Australia that after COVID, electronic signature is now legal in Australia. So your timing is right. And we started training across the enterprise around electronic signature. And we started to implement electronic signature, which is one of the most simple, low-hanging technologies that we have available to us. So one of the beauties of being the last to automate, we have some of the coolest technologies available to us. And so we went in and we started as a gift saying, look, we're going to give you this access to electronic signature. And then then the next present that we provided was a workflow technology. So we pay for both of those technologies wherever they go within the enterprise. We found out fairly quickly that the electronic signature became a legal evangelist. And we became known as technology savvy. And because of that, when the bots came out, when the RPA bot came out and the chat bot has come out, or the IT organization is trying out new technologies, they now come to legal first. And all of those come with funding from the IT organization or from the larger enterprise. And so we did it the other way around. We started out with the gift, and now we are grateful that the other organizations within the enterprise have taken notice that lawyers, ironic as it may feel to some of us, are pretty good with technology. Mm-hmm. And we have now gotten funding through non-traditional resources because of that initial gift.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Amanda, putting your, I guess your consulting hat on more than anything else, and again, just revisiting that question, have you seen, or what have you seen in terms of folks finding funding for this, or I guess support and help internally as well?
I think it comes down to the legal team strategy and making sure that the legal team strategy is aligned to the business strategy. So it's not, quite similar to what Mick said. The legal team needs to have a strategy that is aligned to the business, and then that'll filter down into the way they make their business case, and being able to put the numbers and the figures in there to make the case out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what, Amanda, you make a huge point. There is nothing that we present to the business that doesn't have an ROI and a business case attached to it. That is just a way of doing business, because that's the language that the business needs to hear. And that also helps with change management, and it helps with funding, because all of a sudden you look legit.
And the way every other business unit within the business has to operate, or department, right? I mean, it's
exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of falling in line with that a bit, I guess, as well. So I wanted to revisit with all of you for a second, just this kind of notion of legal ops being a change manager. And I guess that in many respects, the role that they've played in legal departments, it seems has kind of supported in many respects the growth of the alternative legal service provider, to the extent that description is even accurate anymore. And I guess as we look at ALSPs, they don't look like traditional law firms. They do look a bit more like the big four legal practices. But I'm wondering whether indirectly or perhaps directly, the support of legal ops for the growth of ALSPs, and they now looking kind of increasingly less like traditional law firms, is what's actually happening with all of this a determination or a definition of a new legal business model. We keep talking about it evolving, but it seems to me it's already evolved, and it's just kind of more around recognition. But there's so many bits and pieces to that, so I'm going to kind of take them in pieces first. But I think, one of the definitions that we used at the beginning, and I know, Connie, you use as well, is this discussion about legal ecosystem. So maybe starting with that there, what does that kind of mean in a way, the legal ecosystem? And I'll pull up this little slide here of yours as well.
Okay, it wasn't too long ago that the legal ecosystem consisted of corporates and outside counsel. So these two. That is not the case anymore. So we have lots of options now. And some are better qualified than others at doing specific functions. And so we each need to be choosing. You wouldn't choose a plumber to do electrical work. You would pick somebody who just does plumbing. And it's the same thing that is happening in the legal industry. So alternative legal service provider, the numbers have been increasingly moving away from outside counsel. It's been from 2% to 3% to 6% to 12%, which is a big, big number. Doesn't feel like a big percentage, but it's a big jump. You can see that it is progressively bigger. And the reason for that is some of these additional entrants into the legal ecosystem are really good at what they do. And we keep getting additional resources. The one that I added just recently was the marketing and communications. We have added a full-time communications executive into our corporate legal department, and they, consistent with our design of offering gifts, the legal department now has been offering communications services to the rest of the business in preparing decks for the board of directors. So it's a very interesting ecosystem that we work with. Goes back to what we've all been talking about: people, process, technology, people being the most important, the right people, right place, right time, right cost. And now you have a lot of choices.
Yeah.
Really, really good choices.
Yeah.
One being the big four, we need to call it out, right, Mick?
That's right, Connie. We need our own special circle. I appreciate that.
But within all of this, Mick, there's, at the core of it is an enormous amount of change. Whether we're seeing this as a new business model or we're not, certainly in the situation that we're in now, there's so much change taking place. How do you kind of work with and help in-house counsel, but I guess more broadly the principles would apply to the whole legal industry, this whole legal ecosystem, really come to terms with and manage that aspect of change?
So it's a very good question. I think that change is sort of a given now in our industry. It's just a question of what does it look like for individual participants. We've talked a little bit about ALSPs, and I think that the growth rates of ALSPs is really quite exciting, particularly for people like us who are sort of in that space. But if you look at it as actually a percentage of the overall legal market, it's still pretty small. And you could, there are a lot of participants in the legal industry that still probably don't feel that real desperate need to change, or a lot of law firm partners that aren't, that still have, they're still buying holiday houses and boats, and not many of them are probably, applying for JobKeeper. But at the same time, there's on the edges, there's a huge amount of change, and I think there's a sort of and we've talked, both Amanda and Connie have talked about finding the right people for the right jobs. We've talked about strategy. I think a lot of this comes down to a strategy question. Where do you want to play? going forward, because as one of the things that will be common, no matter where you're at in this ecosystem, is the more and more nuanced breakdown of work and activity, the unbundling of legal jobs, so that we can break it up into smaller and smaller parts, and then find the right way to get that work executed, whether it be by traditional law firms or in-house or automation or self-service tools, or the increasing number of new players that are coming in, providing tech solutions or offshore or nearshore or a combination of all of the above. And so the question for everybody is, well, where do you want to play strategically? Because I think that everything will continue to revolve around the corporate legal department, because ultimately they're the ones generating the work and paying the bills. Hopefully we get a scenario where it's not just corporate legal departments, but starts to flow out to sort of smaller businesses and the community more broadly over time. But in the near term, corporate legal departments will be sort of ultimately where the work is coming from. And then the choice will be for all of the different players, where do they want to play? And I think that for some traditional law firms, the right place to play will just be in the traditional space, the high value, really complex work. But others will say, well, I want to, there is a role to, we don't want to let this, the higher volume, lower value work go off to the ALSP. So we will start to think about creating our capability in that space. There's no right or wrong. Ultimately, it's a question of strategy and where do you want to play, and because the choices just become greater and greater for everybody. Part of our role is to help everybody navigate those choices. We have our own sort of strategy to work out as to where we want to play, and as no surprise that the big four all sort of feel that they can probably increasingly play a role in all of the different places. We have a big traditional law firm as well as a new law ALSP. We also have investments in legal tech. There will be the likes of Big Four trying to place a bet in all places, but some will just will always be niche, and there's going to be different roles for different players. But being deliberate about what your strategy, I think, is always going to be key.
But it is opening one's mind to all of the possibilities, isn't it? And basically, I guess, not thinking that we're going to kind of reset to zero. And I want to address the COVID-19 question directly, because it is obviously on all of our minds. But I wanted to just ask you, Amanda, I guess, this question before we do that. As Mick was just describing the market and Connie has described the legal ecosystem, you can almost see emerging here with the two major stakeholders, folks working in-house and folks working obviously in private practice, almost a little bit of a divide or a bit of a chasm kind of developing, because we've focused a lot today and discussed just how much the role is changing for in-house counsel, with legal ops obviously being a key part of that, but not seeing to the same extent, at least, those catalysts for changes outside. Is it fair to describe it as a divide that's growing, or is it just something that at the moment is a splintering and we need to be very, very conscious of it?
Yeah, I think, to some degree, the law firms are a slight disadvantage compared to ALSPs when it comes to being more agile and nimble in their decision making. They're less weighed down by partnerships. So to that degree, they can move. Their ability to move quicker and their speed of adopting the change is faster. The legal departments, they're embedded in the business. They need to respond at the speed that the business needs to respond. The business demands responding. And so if there needs to be a change of direction or a change of strategy, those players tend to be led by individuals who can make some of those decisions a bit quicker and make those brave, maybe more risky decisions. And I think the other aspect of that is mindset. So it's in-house teams are looking to partner with law firms that can join them, that don't have that fear of failure, that can be innovative, reduce costs, take greater advantage of technology, improve project management, So, if your focus, and as Mick said, if your strategy is on just being that niche player and expert legal advice, then that's probably where you're going to play. If you want to bridge that divide or bridge that chasm, then you're probably going to be needing to be looking at innovative solutions, being more of a partnership with those corporate departments to demonstrate that change mindset.
Because for those in-house folks, everyone else is willing to experiment and play the same way and collaborate, right? So again, it's that kind of business as usual change, I guess, that is changing. So let me jump into the COVID-19, in fact, question that we've got. And I'm just going to relay this question for folks and then ask all of you for your comment. What impact will the last 6 months of COVID events have on the growth and impact of legal ops? In other words, is it more of a setback because there's been more of a disruption, no budget, the teams are overwhelmed, or is it more of an opportunity because teams have, I guess, really been forced into a situation where they're thinking more critically about how they work? So looking at COVID-19, and we've touched on it a few times, but squarely now, and Connie, I'm going to address this question, if I may, to you first. Has it become more of a setback, do you think, or has it presented opportunities?
We've been talking about legal operations and how wonderful it is for years and years and years. And finally, the doors of the candy store got blown off. And so we've been saying to everyone, just taste it. It's so delicious. And so that's what's happened. COVID forced digital transformation. The more prepared you were, the more of an infrastructure that you had in place, the easier time you are having now. And so for legal operations, this is a wide open door. There are technologies now that didn't exist even 6 months or a year ago that will be foundational to running a department that is digitally separated. And so I am hopeful that this will be transformational for both the role, for the experiences of those who get to touch legal operations now, and that because if that happens, it is self-reinforcing. It will perpetuate itself, and it will get better and better, and the door's wide open. A good example being electronic signature is legal in Australia.
Mm-hmm. Mick, and I'm going to come to you, Amanda, for your thoughts on this, and there'll be kind of final thoughts from both of you, unfortunately, because it's been such a great discussion. But Mick, have we got the keys to the candy store now, to use the analogy that Connie started with?
Well, I think, and particularly, sitting here in Australia, I agree with Connie that not only has everything been opened wider, but actually the entire sort of globe has sort of all of the barriers for us to be working, sharing, doing, working on projects together have eroded. There is no, but for time zones, there is no reason why all the stuff that I'm doing for work, the collaboration that I'll be doing with an organisation that's headquartered here in Melbourne can't be exactly the same as one headquartered in London or in Chicago. And so I think that it's incredibly exciting for this industry because all of the things that we're doing, as I mentioned at the start, they cross borders. Our legal advice is territorial or jurisdiction specific, but legal ops isn't. And so I think that in many ways, this again only accelerates the journey that we're all going on.
So Amanda, the last word for you, and we'll come full circle. Is legal ops the new legal business game changer?
Look, it's so nice to end this webinar on such a positive note. There probably was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction initially where things did buckle down and tighten, but it's really exciting to see, the use of electronic signatures, collaboration tools like Teams, legal teams adopting whiteboarding tools like Miro or Mural. You know, and I think the real focus now is going to be on information management and knowledge management. That's where I see teams that might have been stuck to a VPN to access their information is they really need to unbuckle that now and say, we really need to work out that form of information management and knowledge management as a priority. And as one GC said when we started working on a contract management solution with them, we don't see this as discretionary spend. This is essential spend for us. So I'll end on that note. I think it is certainly where we're going to be playing in the future.
And it is a very positive, but also thank you very much, all of you, for a very practical and candid and experience sharing based discussion as well. Just absolutely delighted to have you here. On the note of knowledge management and data, don't forget, folks, that we will be having another one of these amazing international sessions actually tomorrow on knowledge management and data. So if you'd like to continue that discussion, do that there. As I mentioned at the beginning, this will be available obviously as a webinar and as a podcast. We have, of course, been recording so that was possible. And we are delighted that you were able to join us. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn or Facebook or just about any sort of social media to find us, and obviously our website and Twitter as well. Again, Connie, Mick, Amanda, an amazing discussion. Incredibly grateful to have you here and for your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and to all of the folks out there, thank you for joining us as well. Until next time. Thank you, folks.
Thanks, Terri.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.